Hello and welcome to Duke Williams online tuition for strategic case study. My name is William Amma and thank you for joining me. Please ensure you have downloaded the corresponding slides for this video so that you can follow me with the discussions. Thank you. In this video, we will be focusing on the syllabus area, that is strategy, stakeholder, and missions. Strategy, stakeholder, and mission. That is unit 01. Now let's begin by looking at the syllabus learning outcomes. We will be looking at definition of strategy and levels of strategy. We'll then go on to look at elements of strategic management and business analysis. We will be looking further into organizational purpose and strategy, and then we'll be finishing with stakeholders and stakeholders' expectation. So that is our syllabus learning outcomes. Let us now begin by looking at strategy and what we mean by strategy. Though there are different definitions for strategies, we will be looking at this as our working definition for strategy and strategic management. In this definition, we say strategy is first of all a course of action. What we want to do is a course of action. So, is it that what business do we want to do? What market we want to go into? What organization we want to merge with? It's a course of action. One. And once the action has been decided, it also has to look at allocation of resources. Because for every course of action, there must be resources that will be allocated. What business do we want to do? Transport business, telecommunication business, or which geographical areas do we want to cover? Accra, Kumasi, or let's say Central Region, Eastern Region, and so on. So when we define the course of action, we also need to ensure that we have the allocated resources available. And in month later, I'll be looking at resources such as what I often call the 7 M's. We'll look at it in more details later, but some of which will mean that some resources that you need to consider will be money or even the manpower, as in the employees. Then you may even need to consider management, the directors, the skills they have. You may even need to consider the machines, among other points. But we will look at it when we go to strategic capabilities. But for every course of action, you must also look at the allocation of resources. And finally, to achieve objective. So you must have defined objective that you are intending to achieve. So there are 3 things that we have looked at: course of action, the allocation of resources to achieve objectives, or some books will say also, or to meet stakeholder expectations. And we'll look at stakeholders. Another thing we want to say about strategy is that strategy is a long-term direction of the organization. Even though we cannot define specifically what long-term should be, because it varies from one industry to the other. Based on the industry, sometimes we may say that 3 years in a particular industry, which is so dynamic, is long enough for things to have changed. Meanwhile, for a stable industry, like a road construction industry, real estate industry, maybe their long term may be 5 years to 10 years before things may change. So it is dependent on the industry. But for teaching purposes, long term direction of the organization may often be, let's say, 5 to 10 years. So it is looking more into the future. What is the direction of the organization in the next 5 to 10 years? That is a strategy looking at length of time. Now, I just mentioned that whenever you are looking at strategy, you are looking to satisfy stakeholder expectations. So for a very good strategy and a workable strategy, you must also consider stakeholder analysis. And in stakeholder analysis, it means that you must consider how the strategy will affect individuals or groups, either directly or indirectly, and then vice versa. So how will the strategy affect individuals, or how will the strategy affect groups? And this may be direct or indirect, and vice versa, meaning how these other groups' activity may affect the organization. So an organization will have to consider its internal and external stakeholders and even connected stakeholders and how they will be affected by strategy, so that the strategy may seek to address their concerns and be more acceptable to the stakeholders. And we'll be looking at stakeholder analysis in more detail soon. So we have strategy as the allocation, as the course of action. One, like what business should we do is the course of action. Maybe if we understand that we are going to do transport business, we need to be able to look at the allocation of resources, the money that we need to buy the buses and so on, the drivers, the directors, the ticketing and all those things, the machines, to be able to achieve our objective or the stakeholder expectation. And it is often long term in nature. Now let's continue by now looking at the levels of strategy. In looking at the levels of strategy, Johnson, School, and Whittington identified 3 levels of strategy. In the hierarchy, the top level, which is often seen to be long term, it has to do with long term plan, and the business level strategy often has to do with medium term, and then often when it is the functional strategy in terms of term or time, it is often short term. So just for guideline purposes, you could look at it from term structure, like how long this strategy covers. Now, in terms of corporate strategy, it deals with the overall purpose and scope, the overall purpose and then the scope of an organization. What is the overall purpose? What is the scope of an organization? And how to add value to the different parts of the organization. How to add value. So the corporate strategy is looking at the overall purpose of the organization, and then the scope, and we will mention scope in more details in a moment, of the organization, and how to add value to the different parts of the organization, like what business should we do. It's a corporate strategy. Now, when you have identified your corporate strategy, you then break it down and come to the business level strategy, and it's about how to compete successfully in a particular market that you have identified that you are going to be competing in. So it is not setting your overall purpose, but how to compete successfully in a particular market. How should we compete in this selected business, in the transport business? But we may be in, let's say, buses. So in the buses, but maybe the buses, the scope that I want to define is inter-regional buses and not within the region. So from Accra to maybe central region, eastern region, western region, northern region. So we are now defining our scope, and we say that how then do we compete in that particular market, like VIP or STC or VVIP or OA? How do we compete in that particular market? Now, having understood how we will compete in the particular market, we then go on to our functional strategies, or sometimes we call it the operational strategies. And it is about how parts of an organization, such as the market, how does the finance and administration, how does the IT support the overall strategy. So we focus on each function and how it can be well set up to support the overall strategy of the organization. How can each business function contribute? Each business function, each department, how can it contribute to the competitive advantage of the entity? So these are the three levels of strategy, and when you look at it from long term, medium term, and short term, that was not done by Johnson and School. It was rather done by another expert, R.N. Anthony, identified three levels of planning within an organization: strategic plan, which is the long-term plan; the tactical planning, which is the medium term; and then the operational plan, which is the short-term plan. So R.N. Anthony also looked at this from another perspective, that we have the strategic plan, which is our long-term plan. Then we have our tactical plan, and then we have our operational plan. I hope that makes sense. Operational plan. So whereas we have three levels of strategy, we also have three levels of plan by R.N. Anthony. All right. Now, let's go further to briefly look at some of the constituents or what make up a corporate strategy, what make up our business strategy, and what makes up our functional strategy. So corporate strategy, as mentioned earlier, is concerned with deciding which business or businesses an entity should be in, the overall purpose and scope of the organization, which business or which businesses an entity should be in. The corporate strategy of Duke William will probably say that the business that I want to be in is professional accounting education. Which business? Professional accounting education or business education. So we have to identify that, or which businesses. So maybe we'll say professional accounting education, then we'll say let's say facility management, and then let's say we are going to be involved in real estate. So which business or businesses an entity should be in, and then setting targets for the achievement of the entity's overall objectives is what we refer to as our corporate strategy. Now, the elements of corporate strategy are as follows. So briefly, when you are setting up corporate strategy, some of the things that go into it is deciding the purpose of the entity. What is the entity in existence? And this is better covered when we look at the organization's mission. We look at the organization mission statement, which we'll be looking at in this same chapter. But deciding the purpose of the entity. Why is the entity in existence? What is the mission? And what is it trying to achieve? Now, when the purpose is being decided, we also need to decide the scope of the activities of the entity. So let's say we are deciding to go into transport business. But in transport business, it could be airline. It could be, let's say, by sea. It could be by road. But even when we go into road, we could go into things like taxis, or let's say all this Uber and Taxify and so on. We could go into trotro. We could also go into, let's say, buses. We could go into rentals and so on. There are so many different things or activities that we can explore under the transport business. So when you decide the purpose of the entity, you then need to decide the scope. And even if it is buses, is it within the region? So are you focusing on only the Greater Accra, and then your buses will run from one place to the other within the Greater Accra, or is it interregional buses from Greater Accra to Western region, to Eastern region, and so on? All these things you must be able to decide on the scope. So you could say that you will be in road business, not taxi or trotro, but you do buses like VIP or VVIP, and it is interregional and so on. And you are only going to concentrate on 5 regions out of the 16 regions in Ghana, and several activities. So in corporate strategy, decide the purpose, decide the scope of the activities of the entity, then match the chosen business activities to the external environment. And we'll look at external environment and the entity, and also its available resources. By resources, I've mentioned something like the 7 M's earlier. Match the business activities with the money, the management, the manpower, the makeup, and so on. Match it with the available resources. We will do this one much later under strategic capabilities. But also match it with the external environment. See what the opportunities and threats are. And we will explore different frameworks like pestle analysis. We will explore another framework like Porter 5 forces, another framework like Porter Diamond, that is helping us to match the business activities to the external environment and the available resources. We also need to match the purpose and activities of the organization to the expectation of the owners. So we will look at shareholder expectation. What are the expectations of the shareholders? Let's say increasing profit, increasing dividend per share, and several other expectations of the owners, and then the expectation of other stakeholders. So these are some of the elements of corporate strategy. Meanwhile, when we have looked at our corporate strategy, we then said that we need to also consider our business level strategy. And the business level strategy, also called competitive strategy, is concerned with how each business activity within the entity contributes towards the achievement of the corporate strategy. How each business activity within the entity contributes towards the achievement of the corporate strategy. Now, according to Michael Porter, a successful competitive strategy or business strategy must be based on either cost leadership or differentiation. So when we come to strategic options, we will be looking further into cost leadership and differentiations and how to achieve cost leadership as a strategy. But ordinarily, what we mean by a cost leadership strategy is where an organization in their strategy has decided to become the lowest cost producer in the market. The intention is for them to become the lowest cost producer in the market. And when they are able to minimize the cost of production, they will then pass it on to the end consumer in the form of lower prices. So they will charge lower prices for their product and or services. That is a cost leadership strategy. Meanwhile, another strategy will be to use differentiation. And this means making products or services that are considered by customers to be different or to be unique from those of your competitors. So you want to make sure that your product or services are different. They are unique, either by the quality, by the shape, by the location, by the style, by the knowledge. You can make your product or service to be different from those of your competitors. And the intention is that so that the customers will then be willing to pay a premium for that product or service. That strategy is referred to as differentiation strategy. And then we will turn our attention to functional strategy or strategies. And functional strategy relates to particular functions within an organization, such as the marketing, administration, research and development. That is different functions within an organization and how they support the business strategy or the achievement of the overall corporate strategy of an organization. That is functional strategies. Now, having looked at these levels of strategies, let's then look at the different approaches to strategic planning. When an organization is considering strategic planning, what are the different approaches to strategic planning? Now, we will be looking at three main modules or approaches to strategic planning. And we will look at one, rational planning model, which is what we will spend most of the syllabus to do. We'll be exploring the rational planning model. And what is this one? The rational model of strategic planning is a top-down approach to strategic planning, meaning it is initiated by senior level management. They work on the whole process, and it is passed on to middle level management and lower level management. It's a top-down approach. Two, it is a formal approach, and we are going to look at the specific ways that we go about setting up a rational planning model. Formal approach, such as saying that where you are going to look at a strategic plan, it gives us that we should start with our strategic position or strategic analysis, and we'll be dealing and looking into this one not long from now. And then it says that once the strategic position has been analyzed, Then we could go on to look at our strategic choice, that the choices that we have to make based on our analysis. Then we should finish by looking at putting the strategy into action. So you see that this is very, very formal, well laid down step, and each aspect of this planning will be dealt in much details. And even when we finish, then we should look at evaluation of the strategic performance. Now, in this way, a formal strategic plan is prepared at a senior management level, covering a period of perhaps 5 to 10 years. And it goes through this formal process. But then when we have the logical incremental model, that is the second thing we want to look at. Another model that an organization may adopt is the logical incremental model. In this approach to strategic planning, is that effective strategies emerge as a series of strategies for subsystems. So each subsystem will be a made strategy for them. Different subsystems may have their own strategies within the organization, one at a time, and not as part of an overall coordinated plan. Because if it is part of an overall coordinated plan, then it becomes a rational planning model. But this one, the subsystems have their own strategies using the principle of the former approach, but then it is not part of an overall coordinated plan. And new strategies are therefore devised and implemented in increments. However, it is a logical or rational process because each incremental change in strategy emerges as a result of position analysis, strategic choice, implementation, and review. So that is our logical incremental model. Then we have another approach to strategic planning, which is the free-wheeling opportunism model. And the free-wheeling opportunism model is that there is no requirement at all for formal strategic planning, where you do position, strategic choice, strategy into action, and all those things. No, there is no requirement at all for formal strategic planning. So what they do is that an organization should be open to seeing new opportunities whenever they arise, and then they exploit them. So let's say when there is frequent power outage, an organization that may be importers of, let's say, cars and vehicles and all those things, may take advantage to import solar energy equipment, generators, so just to take advantage of new opportunities. And or when they realize that there is a boom in the particular sector, then they take advantage and then they compete in that sector or that activities. Now, the organization may have a general idea. Let's say we are general merchants. They have a general idea of the direction it is taking, but it cannot and should not plan in advance what to do. That is free-wheeling opportunism model. And that is a lot of the time when you have small, medium-sized enterprises where you have owner-managed, moving in and out, taking advantage, and so flexible that they can be doing this business now, add this activity to it, drop this activity which is not doing so well because it's no longer fashionable or competitive to be doing that business, and they move from one activity to the other. So these are the three different approaches to strategic planning that we would consider, with particular emphasis on rational planning model. In this wise, if we look at our strategic management, the strategic management, before we look at the three main elements, the strategic management, we will need to consider one, our mission statements, then go on to maybe our goals. I'm putting it in bracket because the goal is further developed into what we will call objectives. So what often happens is that when we have to develop a comprehensive strategic management, it is important to identify the organization mission, its mission statement, and even its vision. From where we will go on to more specifics to generate our objectives. Then we will look at the three elements in our corporate strategy, or the three elements that are the key elements in strategic management. So let's start by looking at missions and then go on to look at objectives and then the three key elements in strategic management. Now, a mission is the purpose of an organization and the reason for its existence. When you talk of the mission of an organization, all you are saying is that what is the purpose of an organization? To provide business education, like Duke William, that is the purpose. Maybe VIP, to provide transportation for interregional travels in Ghana or in the sub-region, West Africa. What is the purpose of the organization and the reason for its existence? To make traveling from one region to the other affordable and flexible or easy. What is the mission? So the mission is the purpose of an organization and the reason for its existence. But then when we put it in a formal document, then we are moving on to what we refer to as mission statements. They are formal documents that states the organization's mission. So that becomes our mission statement. They are published within an organization to promote desired behavior, for support for strategy and purpose, so that whenever we want to make our strategy, it supports the strategy and the purpose. It's the starting point of our strategic management. And it also helps for the adherence to core values and adoption of policies and standard of behavior. Now, we will also realize that some organizations, when you go, they will state their mission and then they will state their vision. So vision is similar to mission statement. But what about vision and mission is that when you look at the vision of organization, it can be used to express the future an organization is trying to create. It can be used to express the future an organization is trying to create, or what the organization aspires to achieve. So it's about the aspiration, what the organization is aspiring to achieve, its future, express the future. So when you have this understanding, it is therefore acceptable to say that while a mission statement defines the present state or purpose of an organization, a vision statement represents a desired optimal future state. And that is very clear now. I think the distinction is clear. The present state and the purpose of the organization is captured in our mission. But then the desired optimal future state of the organization and what they want to achieve over time is captured in the vision statement. So your purpose could be to provide business education in your mission statement, professional education, and then maybe your vision is to be the leading and well-resourced IT professional education in the sub-region, where you are having several professional programs run online and at an affordable rate for all students. You can set your vision, what you aspire to achieve. That is stating your future. Now, having looked at mission statement, vision statement, and so on, the next thing in the strategic management process, apart from the mission, is to go to goals. And from the goals, you go to objectives. But a mission needs to be supported by more detailed objectives. But I just mentioned that when you have your mission and your mission statement, you can look at goals. Then you can look at objectives. Now, what do we mean by goals, then objectives? Very, very simple. When we look at goals, goals are non-quantifiable objectives. Non-quantifiable objectives. Goals are non-quantifiable objectives. Example, your goal could be to increase market share. To increase your market share or to increase your profit is a goal because it hasn't been quantified. Now, an objective from this will be to objective is where the goals can now be quantified. So it is quantifiable. It is a quantifiable or quantifiable goals. Example, increase your market share by 3% per annum over the next 5 years. Now you are more specific. We can quantify it. So I hope the distinction makes sense. You want to increase your market share, is your goal. But stating in quantitative terms, where you are expressing the goal in a quantifiable term, like increasing your market share by 3% per annum over the next 5 years, that is an objective. Now, Draker 1989 suggested that objectives should be SMART. So the objective should be specific, and I think this meets all the criteria. It's specific, it's 3% per annum we want, it is for the next 5 years, and it should be measurable. So at the end of each year, we will look at what the increase in the market share was and compare it with whether we have achieved the 3% or not. It should be achievable. It should not be exaggerated. It should be realistic or result focused, and it should have time boundary, or it should be related to specific time. You say it's 5 years and it says 3% per annum. So each year we can actually measure, see whether we have achieved what we set out for that particular time. And over the period of time, whether over the next 5 years, we know that this is what we are going through regarding our market share. So having your missions you go on to goals. From goals, you go on to objectives. Then from the objective, you go to the 3 key elements that has to do with corporate strategy, and that has to do with your strategic position or analysis of your strategic position. And we'll delve into this one a lot in all the subsequent chapters. Then you look at your strategic choice, and then your strategy into action. And that will make up a good framework for our strategic management. Very good framework. So having looked at mission, goals, objectives, let's now look at the 3 elements, and that we call the strategic management of strategic management. Johnson, School, and Whittington states that strategic management consists of 3 elements. And the 3 elements, as I mentioned earlier, is made up of strategic position, strategic choices, and strategy into action. Now, under strategic position, some of the things we'll be looking at is internal appraisal, where we'll focus on the strengths and the weaknesses within the organization. Then we go on to the external appraisal, looking at the environmental analysis with the aim of focusing on opportunities and threats. Still analyzing your strategic position, you need to do stakeholder analysis. We use the Mendelow's matrix. Then we also have the culture, looking at the culture of the organization, where we'll be focusing on the cultural web. Having done your analysis, you will then use it to make choice. And in the choice, we will have what I often refer to as GES. Please know it's not the Ghana Education Service. G is for the generation of options. E is for the evaluation of options using SAF. S is when you are evaluating option, you have to look at the suitability of the option. A is the acceptability of the option, and F is feasibility of the option. But interestingly, we will look at this in turn gradually over the next 8 chapters. So you generate the option, you evaluate the option, then you select the best option. That is what we mean by GES. Then, once you have done your strategic position, and then you have moved on to your strategic choice, you then finish with your strategy into action or strategic implementation. Strategic implementation, as we call it in the traditional approach. Strategic implementation. And under strategic implementation, you want to be focusing on SRC. SRC, where you look at the structure of the organization and how you are going to organize things within the organization to be able to put the strategy into effect. So S is the organization structure, organizing things within the organization. Then the enablement, the resources that you need to be able to effectively carry out the strategy. And then the C is how you are going to manage change over the strategic process. Strategic process. You need to know how to manage change management, the resources, and the structure. How implementation of strategy affects these various activities. And this is what has been briefly summarized in a diagram under the strategic management. So please have a look And you remember internal, external, stakeholder, we have culture. And when you come to the strategic choice, we have these things like it includes how to achieve your objectives, GES, and what the E is SAF, then the SRS. So please have a look at this one, and we will delve into these things as we progress in the syllabus and in subsequent videos. Having done a strategic management framework, I mentioned earlier that a strategy is also looking at how it affects stakeholders. And so stakeholder and stakeholder expectations starts by looking at what we mean by stakeholders, as I defined earlier, that stakeholders are people or their groups or organizations that can affect, their activities can affect, or they can be affected by our action. So one is that their action can affect an organization, or an organization activity can affect these people, groups, or organizations. So it's bi-directional. Whereas your activity can affect this group, as a group, or this organization, or these people. So let's say DW company, let's say the William company, how your activities affect these groups, these people or organization, make them your stakeholders, or how you are affected by these groups, policies, actions, and so on, also make them your stakeholders. And this can be direct, either you are directly affected or you are indirectly affected. Either you are directly affected or you are indirectly affected. Then we have classifying stakeholders. We have internal stakeholders, those who are within the organization, and they are, for example, employees, management, the board, the internal trade unions, and so on. Then we have connected stakeholders, those who are most affected by the organization activities. Though they are external, they are most affected. So, example of connected stakeholders, they stand to lose most when the organization activities are going bad, or they stand to gain most. So connected stakeholders are shareholders, customers, suppliers, either suppliers of funds, suppliers of raw materials, and so on. So suppliers of labor, maybe they are contract employees. They are not your permanent employees. They are contractors. How they are affected. Then we have external stakeholders. They are less affected. Example, government, local government, public, the community, pressure groups, and so on, and the external trade union bodies. Now, when you have stakeholders, they have varying interests, and it is important for you to be able to prioritize how you can meet their varying interests. So one of the frameworks or modules that we can use to be able to ensure that the varying interests of stakeholders can be assessed and, where appropriate, to be able to meet their interests in order of priorities. Now, Mendel's stakeholder power interest matrix 1991 came up with the fact that when you have stakeholder groups, you have to look at their power, the ability to influence decision or the direction of the organization, and it could be low power or it could be high power. Then you look at the interest of the stakeholders, and it could be low interest or high interest. But it's overly simplistic because you know that it is not very easy to say this is low interest or high interest. It could be that you are not sure whether they are low or high interest. So it's not easy to categorize them under low interest, high interest, and assume that when they are low interest, they will be low interest forever. Because it could be that they may be having low interest at the moment, but when the organization does not make good decision, then they will change to become high interest because they stand to lose a lot. So these are some of the challenges. It's not merely 2x2 matrix which can be addressing all the stakeholder interest. But in a simplistic term, we look at the power and then we look at the interest. And then we categorize the stakeholder based on whether they have low power and low interest. And if they have low power and then low interest, we categorize it under the Mendeleev stakeholder as minimal effort. If they have low power but high interest, we categorize them as keep informed. So this is where we have minimal effort. Keep informed, that is community, representatives, charities, and so on. But when they have high power but low interest, we say keep satisfied. Like large institutional shareholders, and especially government is put at as keep satisfied. And then where you have high power, high interest, we refer to them as key players, like major customers. And you will be able to categorize them, make strategies to ensure that you are able to prioritize. In other priorities is like, one, you make sure your strategies will always be in consultation with the key players, so that you do a lot to make them feel that the strategy is addressing their interest and so on before you lose them. So 1, 2, maybe 3, and 4. So even in looking at strategy, resource allocation, meeting stakeholder needs, you have this at the background of your mind in formulation of policies and strategies to be able to do well as a company. And that is how Mendeleev looked at stakeholders and stakeholders' expectations. Now, we have looked at our unit 1, where we have actually looked at strategy, stakeholders, and our missions. On this page, I want you to make summary notes, make mind map. What have you learned so far in this chapter? And see whether you can recall the things that we have learned. And then in due course, when we begin to put it together in practice and in questions, all will come together to make us well resourced for the strategic case study exam. This brings us to the end of this chapter. Thank you very much for joining me for this session of our video on strategy, stakeholder, and mission. Hope you join me in the subsequent videos as we explore further our strategic case study. Thank you.